Good morning. So it's only me standing between you and lunch, so I'll be relatively brief. So as Martin said, my name is Eli Walter. I work for Bechtel, and I'm currently the Deputy Technical Director over in Muscat. All of that's true, but I'm actually going to depart from Muscat for my remarks today. I'm going to go up to our project in Gatwick, just outside of London, because it tells a bit better of a story from the owner's side of BIM that I think would be very helpful for you to hear. Just a quick overview on Bechtel, in case you're unfamiliar with it. Bechtel's an engineering, construction, and project management company that was founded about 110 years ago as a railroad grading operation in the Oklahoma Territory, in the Wild West frontier in the United States. And it's grown to be one of the largest companies of its kind, with hundreds of projects all around the globe. So primarily what we specialize in is massive infrastructure projects. This is a photo, for instance, of the San Francisco Bay Bridge, which you may have seen, which we built back in the 1930s. And in the region, we're just completing EPCM services on the new Hamad International Airport in Doha. As my colleagues at CCC said, we've just inked a massive project for 2 lines of the Riyadh Metro project with CCC and Al Mabani. And of course, we're over in Muscat, where we're leading a consortium on an EPC contract to build the new terminal there. I've been with Bechtel about 10 years now, and I have seen the implementation of BIM and how it's progressed at Bechtel. So pretty much every job I've worked on in the decade that I've been there has had 3D modeling or BIM of some kind. I worked on a number of projects, a number of airport projects in South America and the Caribbean when I got started. I worked as a field engineer on this building, which is the St. Pancras Station in London, which was part of the high-speed 1 connection from London to Paris. Did a metro extension outside of Washington, D.C., and then was also at Gatwick, which I'll focus on for my remarks today. So I'm not actually a BIM specialist. I mean, most of you probably are much more have much more expertise about BIM than I do. But I'm originally trained as an architect. I've been mainly doing engineering and construction management for most of my career at Bechtel. But I am an optimistic consumer of BIM. I have a vision of a utopian integrated model that becomes the single source of all data for a project, as I'm sure many of you do, that I'm pushing to implement. But of course, as you know, doing that can be much more difficult in practice. And I'll go into that in my remarks. So, before I came to Gatwick about a year ago, I was the manager of engineering on a project we have at Gatwick Airport, which is just south of London. Gatwick, in case you're unfamiliar with it, it's the UK's 2nd largest airport. It's the world's busiest single runway airport in the world, and it's an old and messy facility. If you lived in the UK, you'd probably know Gatwick from the pictures of masses of crowds, people waiting in line, of an old and dated facility. But that's what actually makes it a very interesting case study for the purposes of this conference. Gatwick was sold in the beginning of 2010 to an infrastructure investment fund called Global Infrastructure Partners, which is a group that was formed by General Electric and Credit Suisse. And their business model is to purchase underperforming assets and then make a very quick change in their performance. And that's just what they're aiming to do at Gatwick as well. And one of the things they were buying as part of that purchase of the Gatwick asset was a 5-year capital improvements program. And in Gatwick, in London, several of the main airports are regulated by the government. So they had to execute that capital program as it was agreed to at the beginning. So they had about 4 years left on this capital program that they were buying. And so they asked Bechtel to come in and help them restructure their project management organization and help them manage the rest of that £1 billion program. The program itself is made up of probably 200 different projects, ranging from anywhere from big, massive £100 million pier and baggage projects down to escalator replacements and light post refurbishment, things like that. So it's a very wide-ranging portfolio of works. Gatwick was built around 1952 originally, built just after the war. Started as a competitor airport to Heathrow even back then. This is a picture of it in its simpler days, and it grew about in small projects, a couple hundred different times. So there were myriad additions made to the facility, and so during all of those additions, a lot of the information became fragmented and lost. So they tried to do the right thing. We have a lot of as-built drawings that look like this. We have tens of thousands of CAD files that are in their servers, but in practice, it's very difficult to find information that's useful to you if you're starting a project on this site. So that was a big motivator in finding a better way to keep their data, because they're really thinking, how do we manage this facility for the long term? A second big motivator is that the entire business, and remember this is a private enterprise, it's a commercial enterprise, so the entire business relies on accurate building data. It isn't just the projects that need to be executed with the data, it's the airport operations who need to understand the data that comes out of the projects and the building. It's the commercial property, it's the finance, and of course it's the engineering and maintenance departments who need to know what they're having installed as part of the existing operational airport. So these were big, this was a big impetus to having a major change at Gatwick. So the great thing about GIP as the owner, because they have GE in their blood, they really want rapid change, and they have the financing to do it. So we like to say they're cash rich and time poor. They just wanted a change to be made really quickly. So with that, and with some very intelligent and innovative people within the Gatwick organization, they agreed to make that cut from the CAD world to the BIM world. And they put the past behind them, and they said from now on, any money that gets spent on capital improvements and construction at Gatwick will be done in BIM. So that was a pretty brave step for a client to make who has as much work, as much continuing improvement as Gatwick does. So what did it take? The first thing we did was to create two main documents. The first was a good contract contractual terms and conditions that required every project to be done in BIM, Autodesk Revit to be precise. And then the second thing was we wrote a standard. Now the standard was based loosely on BS 1192, which is the British standard that is one of the main industry standards for BIM. And it mainly focused around the production of design deliverables in BIM. It kept the data side a little bit light for the beginning, and I'll go into that in just a minute. So we created an overall concept, an overall strategy for what we wanted to get to from a holistic perspective. So this is a diagram which is the integrated data model that my colleagues affectionately, I'm sure, refer to as the spin dryer. But what it's trying to show is all of those various outputs from the BIM that one would want to execute using that data. So starting with the planning over there on the right-hand side and going around to design, construction, and then asset management on the left side. These are all, that outer ring is all the use cases for the BIM. So to give you an example, that outer ring has construction phasing and sequencing. Now, this is your typical 4D analysis. That inner ring, that inner circle is the BIM data. That's the building data. That's at the core of this, right? All of these things are relative to that building information set that we're keeping. On that next ring out is meant to show the other data sets that the business keeps. So every business, obviously it would be nice to have a single database, but that's not really practical. So in addition to the BIM data set, we also have the master schedule. We also have document management systems. We also have the commercial data. All of those other data sets that they keep that we might want to integrate with the building data are in that next ring out. And then finally, all the software applications that one would need in order to connect those two are on that third ring out. So in the construction phasing example, you would want to connect your building data from your model with your master schedule, and you may want to use Synchro and Navisworks to do it, for instance, or 3DS, for instance. So that's how we conceived of the model. Now it's almost comically perfect, you know, but it gives an idea and it helps describe the overall integrated model for the entire facility. So how's it going? Well, we made very rapid improvement in the data that was brought in. Now, the animations that I'm showing you now are from the largest project in the portfolio, which is about a 130 million pound combination baggage and pier project that's taking place, that's in development now. What I like about this animation is you see the bare engineering model up there on the left-hand side. So we're walking through the model in Navisworks, and you can see the layers of information start to come out. You know, the colors. You can start understanding more information about the building other than just how it looks. And then, of course, there's the rendered Hollywood view on the bottom left-hand side, which is also obviously very effective, especially for a regulated airport where you're required to help all the stakeholders, all the airlines and all the government agencies and anybody else who has a stake. You can help them understand what we're spending the money on. On the top right-hand side is a very mechanical BIM that was produced by the baggage suppliers, Chris Plant. And then on that bottom right-hand side is an actual baggage handler using a prototype of that very equipment. So we're getting a lot of really good information like this that's pouring in as part of these projects. This is another example from the portfolio, which is a model that was done by Atkins. This is a design for the south extension at Gatwick of Pier 6, which is over there on the right-hand side of the picture. Now again, this is a very nice rendered view of the project and of the design, which is, I think, a very impressive rendering. Looks very good. But what I really like is that it has this behind it, because I find this much more interesting. This is again what I call the engineering model. It is the model out of Navis, as seen in Navis, and the reason why I think this is so much more rich is because it means there's data behind it. Now, you can have this type of thing without creating a data-rich model, but this really tells you that we have parametric objects, they have intelligence, they have that we're creating a data set more than we are just a picture. Another quick improvement that we saw being made was that we started getting tighter procurement on projects. So we didn't have a whole lot of data points to review on this, but traditionally we had about a 12% spread between price when we bid a project. Now you can go into the reasons why on that. That gets rather complicated, but after we introduced BIM, the process was that we as Gatwick would do the design in BIM. We would give the model to the bidders, and then they have a complete data set that they can go out and price. So they don't have to spend their time trying to estimate the quantities and things. And so we ended up with a 5 to 6% spread after that. So it was a dramatic improvement. I think those numbers have to, we have to get some more data to really find out how accurate that is. But I think it was a quick win. The other thing we're finding is that the Gatwick business is really starting to like all of this data they're getting. So what I've shown on the screen here is not a very good image, but what this is a trial which integrates a building information model that was done for the airside operational building, which is a project in progress at Gatwick, into Maximo. So if you're unfamiliar with Maximo, Maximo is an asset management database that a business like Gatwick uses a lot. And Gatwick wants to know the value of every single asset in their entire portfolio. So they have hundreds of thousands of assets in this database, and they track the value of those assets, and they track the assets themselves in Maximo. So Maximo is a really big tool for Gatwick. And so what we did, we took the model, put it into Glue, and integrated it right inside of Maximo. So Maximo, the operators were able to get inside the model and actually pull the data from the model that came out of Maximo, if that makes sense. So what you're seeing here is the HVAC system in a particular building that you can click on an air handler and say, that air handler was serviced at this time. It is, it costs this much. Its next maintenance date is this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that gives the business a real good vision for how to use this data. Another big initiative that we were working with is called our augmented reality. Initiative. And what this is what we're doing is taking the building information models and overlaying them within the camera of an iPad using a tool called Genao AR. And what that allows you to do is see a model within the image of a camera, and then be able to access the other data sets within that model. So that was a trial that allowed you to go in and pull out the drawings from the EDMS while you viewed what the model will look like in a particular space. This is something that Bechtel is really interested in spending a lot of effort on. And Gatwick, for their purposes, they really want to be able to walk into any room in their very complicated and very old facility and point an iPad at the wall and see what's behind it and be able to take information off of it. And with this type of tool, they'll be able to do that. And with accurate models, they'll be able to do that. So from the owner's perspective, this has a tremendous amount of value. So of course there are a lot of challenges. From a data perspective, you need to know what you want to do with the data very early in the process. Now, in a couple of the major projects that started after we made the switch to BIM, we got caught in the not knowing what we wanted to do, and the operational teams who would be the consumers or the receivers of the data, they didn't actually know what they wanted to do with it yet either. And so what happened was we dumped them with huge data sets of all these objects and all this information, and they didn't know quite what to do with it, and it wasn't according to their process and things like that. So it's obviously important to know very early how to structure that model and how to provide a work breakdown structure so that the data is useful by the time it comes out. And it's also key to keep in mind that structure needs to be in place as you build the model for it to be efficient. Obviously, you can go back and apply a numbering system after the fact, but it would be very difficult to do. And most of these models that you'll see here, and most of the models that we work in at Bechtel, are in the order of more than 500,000 objects, probably closer to 1 million in most cases. So to go back and try to apply some numbering system after the fact is going to be nearly impossible. So it's obviously very important to have that structure ready before you start the design, so those architects and engineers can be inputting that data as you go along. One example of the data mismatch is on cost estimation. So another process we tried to push forward was, actually that's a little bit too early, so take that back. Another process we tried to push forward was cost estimation using the BIM data sets. Now, if you've worked up in the UK, and probably the same is true here, that the quantity surveyor is the person in the industry who generally does the cost estimation. But we very quickly found out that when we showed up at their desk with reams of data that came out of the model, they want nothing to do with it because they're not able to verify it using their standard method of measurement, and so they want to go away with their highlighters and their slide rules and their rulers to go do a real estimate. So we immediately had a mismatch. So on the next projects, one of the very first things we did was to begin to have workshops about how those quantity surveyors could use that data coming out of the model. And then I mentioned another example on the Pier 5 project that we had, which was another major project. One of the issues was that the asset management. The asset management structure wasn't defined before when we started doing the model. So by the time we got to the end of the model and we showed up with all these objects, they didn't quite know what to do with it. So again, that needed to be written back into the standard to say, as you go through and as you build that model, you need to have it defined in such and such a way. But that was a very important lesson learned early in the process. There have been another couple of key issues with getting good models as well that we quickly discovered with some of our designers and contractors. And that is that the problem is that BIM talent is relatively scarce. Now this isn't necessarily the case in London as much as it is places like the GCC, where you have a lot of CAD talent and you have less BIM talent. But the same is true even in London and mature markets like the US as well. And so you end up with a mismatch again, and I'll go into that. So what I'm showing here is a pure BIM design process where the BIM model is used as the source of all design deliverables, all design reviews, and the feedback loop goes right back into the BIM so that you do all of the modeling, all of the sheets, everything inside the model, right? That's the easy thing to do. And if you were doing a $500,000 house, that would be the way to go because it's relatively small and easy. However, what a lot of projects tended to do, or they tried to do, was to do a quasi BIM BIM scenario. And I think Martin talked about this a little bit earlier. And what they did was they would try to do the stick with their CAD process, do all their design in CAD, do all of their sheets in CAD. Oh, and then we'll have these guys off to the side who update the model as soon as they get the design. Another version of that is, well, we'll use the BIM model as the model, and then we'll do all the sheets in CAD because that's easiest. We can do all the notation much more quickly, and it'll be fine because we have a whole lot of CAD talent sitting out there, and we don't quite know what to do with Revit yet because our two Revit guys can't keep up. But if you start beginning to think of it as a longer process, you will always get to a point in a design where the delivery pressure begins to ratchet up. I think anybody who's an engineer, been through a design process knows this always happens, and you begin to jettison any secondary process because everybody's got to get on board and get the design deliverables done. So if you're doing it if your main process is CAD and that's what you're basing your deliverables on, you're immediately going to jettison your BIM guys. This has actually happened on a couple of projects that I've been on, and because, like it or not, the design deliverables are what you get paid for, and you're going to get rid of all that other stuff, even if it makes trouble down the line. But if you're thinking of it as a longer-term process, as not just the production of design deliverables, but the assembly of building information, you're going to quickly understand that there are a whole lot of post-design activities that rely on verified engineering data. And what I mean by verified engineering data, of course, is model data that has been verified to match your approved design, right? So in the feedback loop of engineering, you need to be able to take it out, review, make a comment, and it goes right back into the model. And if you've got separation between your AutoCAD and your Revit, there's a chance that it might not make it back into the Revit, and then you're going to have a gap. And then your model data is going to be inaccurate. So it's, of course, really critical if you're going to use data from the building for any of those downstream applications. It's really important that you have a good, accurate model. And so again, coming back to this design process, this is where you want to aim. Now that's very difficult, and I'll talk about that a bit more. But that's really the pure process that you should hope for. So I haven't spent a great deal of time on the return on investment, and the only thing I will really say about it, because I unfortunately don't have good metrics, even though Martin asked me for them several times. It's important to keep in mind that a client like Gatwick has a relatively small barrier to entry for this. It's relatively low risk. It doesn't cost them a lot, and it will breed a lot of efficiency. If you go back to this model, if you don't have that central source of data, there's going to be a secondary process for the assembly of a data set to support each one of those activities. There's going to be somebody going out and trying to do a material takeoff, or trying to produce a secondary model that can help you with your punch list and handover, for instance, or any of those things you want to do with it, or for your asset management. So there are only upsides from the perspective of Gatwick, and it cost Gatwick actually very little. Gatwick had to form a team of people who would look after the models, who would structure it, who would do verification on the models coming in. but there isn't a lot of software, for instance. They don't have to supply the CAD people. So it's important, of course, that you, as the professionals, understand the process and be good at it, because you will be sure, if you haven't yet, to meet a client like Gatwick who just wants the BIM in their process. So I'm going to end up with a few lessons learned that I've tried to make relatively simple and be useful to you. The first one is, of course, get the talent. Now that sounds a little bit obvious, probably, but you need a lot of talent for those times when the delivery pressure is going to ratchet up. If it's one guy or two people who are trying to do all of the BIM, that's going to be very difficult for them to support an entire process, especially when it gets tricky, when it gets difficult, when it gets hard. And aside from BIM, you need people who understand data, know what to do with data, know how to manage data. Now, obviously, most projects can't support having a separate database technician, but if you're a large project, you're going to eventually need some way to manage all that data. One of the things we're facing at Muscat is that we have a model with probably close to 1 million objects. And the amount of data that we want to put in that model is just too great for Revit. So we need separate databases. Well, how do you build a separate database? I have no idea. I barely knew what a database was when I started talking about it. So you need some way to externally manage the data, and you need the people who will help you understand that. So even if you don't have somebody in-house, you've got to have somebody someplace to go with it. Begin with the end in mind. That is really about defining what the other functions in all the way through your process are going to do with your data. So what are your project controls and costs and commercial people going to do with it? How do they want it? What are the deliveries going to be? How is construction phasing going to be done? What are the outputs that you can give them? All of that really needs to be defined early, because by the time you get into that design process, it's going to be really difficult to start defining that. Scuttle the ships. This is if you're unfamiliar with the reference, this is when the Spanish explorer Cortez was trying to discover the New World, he had some mutineers who wanted to take one of his ships and go back to Cuba. So he did the leaderly thing to do, and he burned all his ships. So they had no choice but to go with them. And what I mean by this is, try to divorce the process from AutoCAD as best you can. And I realize, again, this is difficult because you probably have a lot of CAD talent. But if you can rely on CAD, you will when the pressure starts. So if you can build your whole process around Revit and do all of your notation, all of your sheets, everything in Revit or in Bentley or in ArchiCAD or whatever your BIM platform is, that's going to benefit you later on when you rely on that data. So weave it together and create dependencies. As the previous speakers mentioned, it is absolutely critical to have a work breakdown structure. Without the work breakdown structure, you're never going to be able to access your data quickly. You're never going to be able to make sense of the data after it gets spit out of your model. And that's something that needs to be defined. It doesn't actually need to be very difficult either. But it's absolutely critical very early. Get the team hooked. So one of the things we did at Gatwick that was very successful is we started finding easy ways for the rest of the business, outside of the people who knew how to use Revit and knew how to use Navis and knew how to read drawings. We found ways for them to use it. So one of the things we did was to make an intranet site on the Gatwick web page where they could download Navis models, they could open up a free Navis viewer, and they could go to preset views of the projects that we were working on. So that way anybody could really open up a model, get in and see what it looks like, and help participate in the process. Other things we did was to publish data. So we said, well, early on we're going to start publishing the room sizes, for instance, and that gets that gets the commercial property people, for instance, really interested, because they're going to be able to charge for that area within the model. So you need to give the team a way to understand the data and to make use of it, and they will then start asking for it rather than you trying to push it on them. And then the final thing, you need to be able to refer to the data a lot yourself. You need to keep going to the model to provide examples of why it's so useful. Clear the obstacles. This is mainly a reference to CAD standards, which if you're in a CAD environment, CAD standards are of course very, very important, especially for a facility like Gatwick, which has hundreds of thousands of drawings and lots of files, but it creates an industry of its own, and it creates a very difficult problem that you have to solve year after year. So to the extent you can go in with your owner and say, owner, depart from those CAD standards, get rid of them, because if you have to produce an output from your Revit or from Bentley or whatever, from your BIM, that is compliant with CAD standards, you're going to create a huge problem for yourself. So you need to deal with that early on and say, you know, look, I may not be able to give you something compliant with your CAD standards, but I'll give you something much, much better. And again, think data. So it's important to think about the data and how to externally manage it. There are a few applications that we've come across. There's one called DRufus, there's one called Codebook, where you can, they're separate applications where you can organize and manage the data that then gets synchronized with your Revit model. That makes it a whole lot easier to understand the data. You can have people working on the model who don't even know how to do Revit if they know how to access the data. And that can become real important, because that data and the cleanliness of it is going to become absolutely critical if you want to use it downstream. So I hope I've demonstrated how a relatively sophisticated client kind of approaches this issue, you know, a client like Gatwick, a business, is very hungry for data. They see it as a low risk problem, and it's a low investment for them. So of course they're going to want it, which means that any of us who are doing work for those types of clients are going to need to get on board and need to understand how to do it and how to do it well, and do it in a way that benefits our own business. It can be very difficult, and there will be fits and starts in your own process, and there will surely be people within your organizations who don't understand the value of it, who want to go back to what they know is tried and true. But it takes people like you to understand what that vision is, and to go ahead and fight for it, and to sell it, and to explain what the value is of that data that you're building throughout the process. And I'm confident if you do that, that it'll reward you downstream. Thank you.